For most people, we're letting you go are the words you never want to hear. Being made redundant or laid off can be shocking and devastating. Here are some of the things that scare people about redundancy. Some of them are the ones that scared me, and others I got from asking around a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this talk. And feel free to add any more in the chat if you want to share. So, will I find a new job is a big one. What are people going to think of me? What's the next place going to be like? You know, whether or not your current place is good or bad. So it's always a bit of a worry being the new person. If you're in the country on a work permit or a visa, you know, will I have to leave the country is a bit of a worry if your visa's tied to your job. And, you know, for those of you that aren't in a country where you get state healthcare, you know, what am I going to do if I lose my healthcare that's tied to my job? How will potential employers view this situation? You know, I'm just generally worried about the job search because that's painful at the best of times. Job market, you may think, doesn't look too good. And also somebody did say, what am I going to think of myself? So not only what are other people going to think of you, but what are you going to think of yourself? How are you going to feel about yourself if this happens to you? And also here are some of the feelings that you're likely to feel. Again, you know, these are all the feels that I've had over the years, and some of the things that people have said to me that they felt as well. So you feel rejected. It's quite hard not to take it personally. You might feel victimized or singled out. You know, I actually did feel happy at one point and maybe a bit relieved. You might feel confused as to how this has happened to you or why it's happened to you. You might feel wronged, and you might feel resentful. And all of these are perfectly valid. You should allow yourself to feel the feels and just recognize how healthy it is to continue feeling some of them and to maybe stop feeling others. And again, feel free to share in the chat any other feels that you've felt in this situation. So my name's Suze Shardlow, and I've faced redundancy 3 times in my career. It became easier for me each time because I learned something new about the process, and knowledge is power. You can find me online at suze.dev or on Twitter at Suze Shardlow. Please do tweet at me. I would love to hear from you. And I'd also love to know what particularly resonates with you about this talk. Like Kevin said, it's very timely, but actually Kevin and I had the conversation best part of a year ago about doing this talk, at which point the job market looked really healthy. There were some redundancies, but not as many as now. And unfortunately now people really need to hear this advice. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer, coding instructor, event MC and technical writer, and I'm currently head of developer community at Redis. So those of you that seen my talks before, you'll know this picture. This is a picture of me on my 13th birthday using the computer that I learned to code on. And like I said, I'm giving this talk because there's been a lot of redundancies in the tech industry over the past few years, and there seems to be another surge of them at the moment. And some of you will have been made redundant before. Some of you might be fearing the possibility whether or not you have faced this situation. In this talk, I'm going to outline the things that you need to know and do before, during, and after your job is taken away from you to help you protect your emotional and financial well-being. So the first thing I want to say is that I always try to say that's your job that's being made redundant. So it's your job that's being made redundant, not you that's being made redundant, because that's true. They can't make you redundant. They can only make your job redundant. So it's not you, it's your job. And I know that's hard to believe, because whenever anyone ever says it's not you, it's me, like, you never believe them, but it is. It's not you, it's your job. And although redundancy is a form of dismissal, so it was quite harshly pointed out to me that I was being dismissed by reason of redundancy. You haven't done anything wrong, and it's nothing to do with your ability to do your job. So the reason you're leaving is nothing to do with your ability to do your job. It's for business reasons. It doesn't make it feel any better, but I think it's important to make that distinction. So let's start with the things that you can do now. Preparation is key. And this is all about trying to keep your knowledge current in various ways so that if your job does get made redundant, you'll be in a better place mentally as well as from a practical point of view. So the first thing you're going to do is make sure you soak up all the information you can about where you work. And you might think you already know a lot, but you probably don't know everything you need to know. So if you have all hands or town hall meetings, so if there's a meeting that the company holds with the C-suite, they invite everybody in the company, make sure you go to those meetings. Listen carefully and ask questions if you need to. Some companies allow you to ask anonymously. So if you want to do that, then do that, or ask your manager to ask on your behalf anonymously or something. But if you've got questions, make sure you ask them. Make sure you're holding these people to account, because at the end of the day, they are paying your rent or your mortgage. So make sure you ask what you want to know. Now, I've started with this tip because if you have to attend these meetings anyway, then you don't have to use your spare time. And some of the other tips I'm going to talk to you about, you will have to do some work in your spare time, but these meetings are held within your working day, so you won't have to allocate any of your extra time for that. And sometimes they make a recording so you can watch it whenever suits you. You just need to get used to listening out for a few things if you attend these meetings. And sometimes they are a bit dry, but it's got to be done. So the first thing you want to know is the company profitable? Now, just for the avoidance of doubt, profit is the difference between the money coming in and the money going out. It has got to do with how much is coming in, but it also got to do with how much is going out. And there's 3 types of profit, but essentially the only difference is in calculating them is the types of outgoings you include. So I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that, but you've got to remember it's what's going out as well as what's coming in. And I think a lot of people assume that because the company's got a lot of funding and is spending money on recruiting and nice offices, that they are profitable. And that isn't always the case. In fact, I would argue that especially with startups, they probably are not profitable because they're trying to gain market share because they're a brand new company. They're trying to increase their customer base, and to some extent, they're still developing their products. And that all costs money in salary, marketing, advertising, all the rest of it. And now, if you're working for a company that isn't profitable, that isn't a problem in and of itself, because I've already said that lots of startups aren't profitable. But what you need to think about is how long they've been operating and whether they're getting closer to profitability. Have there been any comments made in the town hall meeting about whether the sales targets have been met and things like that? So the next thing you want to be listening out for in a town hall is anything about funding and runway. Runway is the amount of time that the money in the bank will last. So if the runway is only 6 months, that might be a bit of a red flag. And also you want to know about funding. So how many rounds of funding has the company received? Have they been successful at each round? I've heard about some founders that will promise and plan a lot of things based on the funding they're confident they're going to receive in 2 weeks' time, only to then be turned down and queue lots of redundancies and lots of rescinded job offers, but that's a whole other story. So that's the company intel you need. And next up, another thing you can do just in preparation before you get any whiff of any sort of trouble, check your contract. So some employment contracts tell you what you would be entitled to in the event of redundancy. And I used to work for the Met Police, so that was a civil service pension place. And so our redundancy was controlled by civil service pensions, so it's really easy to go and find that out. But have a look at your contract and see what it offers you in the event of a redundancy. And if you've got friends at the company that you trust, ask around and find out what happened to people who've been made redundant there before. And also what you can do is you can search Twitter to see if any ex-employees have tweeted about how they were treated. Some people will do that, especially if they haven't signed any sort of agreement that says they're not going to disparage the company. They're quite open with all of that information. So things might have changed since those people have written about it, but at least you'll have some idea of what you might be able to expect, especially if the leadership at the company hasn't changed since then. And the other thing you need to make sure you know is, while you're still employed, you need to know what the demand and the value of your skills is in the industry. So every so often, browse the job sites for the role you currently do and a level or 2 above, because we want to aim high. Even if you are happy in your job, I cannot stress this enough. It is much easier and it's much less stressful to have a look at those job ads when you really don't need to move. So make sure you appraise yourself of the situation. Make sure you know what the job market looks like, how many jobs there are, how much they're paying, and what they're looking for. See if you can notice any trends. Are they looking for a tool you haven't used yet? Can you start using that at work? Is there another language that's high in demand that you don't currently use that much? Do you have any experience in it? Is it something that you can feasibly increase your competence in? So this means that you're a bit more job ready if you do lose your job. Now, this is especially important if you aren't a citizen or permanent resident of the country you live and work in, because your visa is tied to your job. So the last thing you want is to be told that your job's going. It's like, I know I'm going to have to leave the country. I have no idea what the job market looks like for my skills at the moment. You really need to know that before. What you can do if you're in that situation is consider joining online groups for other people that are in the country in the same situation that you are. So other people that are there on work permits, because quite often they will share information about where they work. And then you can build up a list of companies that are willing to sponsor visas, because sometimes that can be quite hard to find out. And also, again, it's not something you want to be finding out 5 minutes before you need a new job. So you can build up that list before you start and just keep adding to it. So there's no silver bullet here, but if you have all of this knowledge, then the job search won't be as much of a shock if you were suddenly thrown into it. So you've been told those words, we're letting you go. What do you do during the process? If you're told that your job is being made redundant, sometimes you have options and other times you don't. So that means that sometimes you're going to be asked to leave straight away. And this seems to happen a lot at tech companies. They'll sit you down and say, we're letting you go. And your last day is, well, you're essentially going now. We'll pay you in lieu of notice. So what happened to me the first time my job was taken away, I was a marketing manager and they took that role away and put in a new role of sales support. So that was a bit of a drop for me. It was a small IT company and they offered me this role for 3 months. If I remember rightly, it was quite a long time. It was nearly 20 years ago. So if I remember rightly, they offered me the sales support role for 3 months on the same salary I was on as the marketing manager with a commission element on top. And at the end of the 3 months, either side could say they didn't want to continue. And I knew I definitely didn't want to work in sales because it's not my bag. But I took the job anyway because it was 3 months of income. And there was a thing at the end where either one of us could say goodbye. So I thought, right, I can do the 3 months. I can still take the redundancy at the end. And the way I've described it sounds like they were doing me a favor, but to be honest, they weren't. The commission was hardly anything. And I hadn't had any sales training, so I wasn't set up for success in this role. But I took the job because I wanted the income. They had basically told me that they were making my role redundant. It was just before Christmas. I was not living in London and I had to commute in by train. I had just bought an annual season ticket for like £3,500. And I was like, yeah, I am not happy about this at all. So I took the job because I wanted the income. And so I looked for a new job. I received some offers, which I rejected because they were too low. And then at the end of the 3 months, I took the redundancy option with no job to go to because I wanted to leave. And like I said, I wanted the redundancy pay on top. If I had just resigned, I wouldn't have got that. And it wasn't much redundancy pay. What they did was they paid me the minimum required by law, which was hardly anything, but it was still better than nothing. So they let me go straight away. So I left that same day and then they paid me a month's salary in lieu of notice. So I didn't have to work that, plus the statutory redundancy pay, which was only a few £100s. And then luckily my job hunting paid off and I got another job that paid 35% more than my ex-marketing job a few weeks later. So a little side note, after that job, I vowed not to take a salary lower than I felt I was worth. So I set my number and I stuck to it. And I'm not too sure why it worked, but I'm just glad that they didn't take away my self-esteem with all that happened to me. And for some reason, I felt really powerful. I don't know, I could get that salary and I did. So despite the fact it was really upsetting and it's the first time it happened to me, it worked out okay. And like I said, I left without a job to go to, but I did get one shortly afterwards at the salary I wanted. So it was scary, but it was fine. So another thing to remember is that if a company's making redundancies, it doesn't mean it isn't growing. And that might sound like a really weird assertion to make. It's like, Suze Shardlow, what are you talking about? It's true. So a company can make redundancies in one area and still be hiring aggressively in other areas. And sometimes they might still be hiring aggressively in the same area, but different roles. And so this happened to me the third time that I faced redundancy. Like I said, I was working for the police and we covered 32 of the 33 London boroughs. The role I had, there was one of us on each of those 32 boroughs. So there were 32 of us. And they decided they were going to trim down the numbers. So instead of having one borough each person would have 4 boroughs. And then at the same time, they were changing the roles, so it's going to be at a higher grade. So you're going to have a higher grade, more boroughs. And also within those teams, they were aggressively hiring admin people 3 levels below me. So within my team, I had admin people. They were growing that layer and trimming down my layer. So you can see how that kind of worked. They decided that's what they needed for the business. So it all depends on what the organization needs at the time. And I was offered the opportunity to apply for the higher job, but I declined because I wanted to leave the organization. That was when I decided to pivot into tech, and I'd gone on a coding boot camp and I was ready to go. And this is also common when there's a restructure. So I've talked about the first time I was facing redundancy, the third time I was facing redundancy. So the second time my job was made redundant, there were 3 of us at the grade I was at, but there were only 2 jobs in the new structure of that unit. So we're doing a restructure. There were 3 of us in there and they reduced it down to 2. One of the jobs was very similar to the job I was doing, but I wanted a complete change and I decided to apply for a completely different job in a new area. So I went from marketing and communications into covert surveillance. So what I'm trying to say with all the above is that depending on your skills and what you want to do, you might be able to do what I did and preserve your income and get a job elsewhere in the company. So make sure you ask that question. And it doesn't have to be forever. It can just be for a short while. It depends how open you are to change. It depends what's available. It depends how you want to take your career. But that could be an option that's available to you. And I think it's something that you should definitely ask the question about. I know a lot of people that can't do what I did, and they couldn't take the money and go without something else to go to. So if there's another job available in the organisation that you'll be prepared to do, speak to them about it and see if they will support you in moving to that role. So if you are definitely leaving, what can you negotiate? There are some things. You might be able to keep your laptop and other hardware. So ask the company if they will include this in your severance package, because quite often it's more useful to you than it is to them, and they might be able to write it off as another loss. You know, it's worth asking the question. If you're in the UK and you're not leaving straight away, you're entitled to paid time off to look for jobs. So my boss at my last job was super pragmatic, and she let me have time to go off to go to hackathons and stuff because she knew I was pivoting from policing into tech. So you might be able to negotiate the money that they give you, but that depends on a lot of things, so don't rely on that. So, you know, if the company's really desperate and they're getting rid of people because they haven't got any money, chances are they won't be able to give you more severance. But, you know, feel it out and see what you think. And if you're in somewhere where like the US, where healthcare is sometimes tied to your job, make sure you know your rights under what's called COBRA. So COBRA, like the snake, which is designed to protect people who lose their jobs. There's sort of an inbuilt a period of time after you finish working somewhere where you're still entitled to some healthcare coverage. So make sure that you know what your rights are there. So after you've left, take some time to breathe. It can be very traumatic and a shock. Even if you've done all your research, it can still be a shock to have that conversation. Especially if you're the only one or you don't understand why it was you and not other people, you know, it's very painful. Think about what you want to do next. And if you know the market and your skills, then entering the job market will be less painful. Reach out to your networks and tell them that you're looking. And I know when I lost my job the first time, it was a relief in the end because I could be more open about the fact that I was looking, and I just erased the sales support job from my history. And you'll probably find it a bit weird at first telling people that you don't have a job. And I definitely found this because I hadn't realized, because I'd always been working, that that's one of the first things that somebody new asks you if you're on a meetup or something. It's like, where do you work? And then, you know, if you haven't got a job, it's really hard. So just be prepared for that. It is a little bit weird at first, but, you know, that's a fact. People just have to accept that you don't have a job and you're looking. And I remember when my dad's job was made redundant back in the 1990s, there was a big stigma attached to it. And then it actually became desirable to get redundancy because people realized they could take the money and the opportunity and do something with it. And speaking of money, in terms of money in the UK, the first £30,000 of your redundancy pay is tax-free. If you receive more than that, you can either claim the tax back straight away or wait until the end of the tax year, and then they will send you the money. And the last thing is check your entitlement to benefits because you might be able to get something even if you think you're not eligible. So in summary, to navigate redundancy, understand the environment. So that means understand the environment that you're working in your company and understand the environment outside. in the job market. Understand your options. So know what will happen in the event that you face redundancy. If you do get told that your job is redundant, find out what other options you have inside and outside the company. Feel the feels, and be kind to yourself. So, you can't get away from the fact this is an extremely painful situation. You didn't ask for it. It is something that is being done to you. One thing I would say is that the resentment, it does take hold in you, but try and get rid of that one quick, because I always feel like resentment's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work like that. It's natural, but as soon as you can get past that, you can move on and go on to the next great thing. So my name's Suze Shardlow. I hope I've given you something to think about today. Feel free to reach out to me at suze.dev or at Suze Shardlow on Twitter. Thanks for listening.